The year, everything snapped. I was standing in my dad's backyard with a tray of pecan pies in my hands, and the kind of cold that sneaks through your boots and climbs all the way up your legs. Christmas Eve in the foothills outside Denver always carried that sting. But that night the air felt sharper, meaner somehow, like it knew what was coming long before I did. David had turned the whole patio into a holiday postcard. White lights wrapped the posts and railings, glowing against the snow piled along the fence. The fire pit crackled, the patio heaters hummed, and the house behind us was full of warm light and laughter. Kids ran in circles between the heater and the old wooden bench, slipping on patches of ice while their parents shouted half-hearted warnings. Someone had turned on Christmas music from a small speaker by the door, a soft background hum under the chatter. I shifted the tray on my hip and made my way toward the long folding table my mom had fussed over for days. Green tablecloth, gold candles already tilting in their holders, dishes lined up like soldiers waiting for inspection. Mom always said a perfect table meant a perfect night. I set the pies between a dish of sweet potatoes and a spiral ham, letting out a slow breath that puffed white in the air. As I straightened up, I felt it again, that tight pull across my shoulders that always showed up at Hanover family gatherings. The one that told me to stay quiet, stay helpful, stay small. I glanced around the patio, neighbors from church, cousins I had not seen since last Christmas, and a handful of people from Dad's company. All of them were smiling and swapping stories about how wonderful the Hanover family was. Like they were repeating a script they had practiced. If you are listening to this right now, I am curious what you are doing. Are you cooking dinner, driving home, folding laundry while the dryer shakes the whole room? The first time I told this story out loud, I was sitting at my grandmother's faded kitchen table with a mug of cold coffee and a blanket around my shoulders because the old heater never quite worked right. If you feel like it later, tell me in the comments where you are and what you are doing while you listen. It helps knowing I am not the only one sitting with memories like these. From across the patio, Sabrina stood in a circle of people like she was the North Star. My sister, in a red velvet dress that looked like it had been painted onto her, champagne in hand, laughing in that breathy, confident way that always drew people in. One of Dad's vice presidents said something funny and she tilted her head, lashes lowered, soaking in every bit of attention. The whole group leaned toward her without thinking, like flowers turning toward the sun. I grew up in that shadow. You would think I would be used to it by now, but that night, the sight hit me differently. Maybe because I was tired from a long work week. Maybe because it was Christmas Eve, and I had held on to the small, stupid hope that the holiday might feel a little gentler this time. Or maybe because deep down, I already knew something was about to go terribly wrong. Then I heard the sound that changed the entire night. The sharp ting-ting of metal against crystal. Everything stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Kids froze where they stood. The music faded into a soft echo. Everyone turned toward my dad. He stood near one of the stone columns holding up the patio roof, one hand on a champagne flute, the other resting proudly on Sabrina's shoulder. Under the soft white light, his silver hair looked thick and perfect, instead of thinning the way it did in him. The bathroom mirror, his cheeks were bright from the whiskey he thought no one noticed. He wore that big, warm Hanover smile, the one he saved for charity dinners and groundbreakings. If you did not know him, you would think he was the perfect dad in the perfect Christmas moment. He thanked everyone for coming, talked about how blessed we were, how proud he was of his girls. I drifted closer, feeling the heat from the patio heater at my back, the cold nipping the front of my legs. My hands felt oddly numb. Dad said Sabrina had worked so hard this year, that her online business was thriving, that she and her boyfriend were finally talking about settling down. People clapped. Sabrina lowered her head like she was shy, but her smile told a different story. Then Dad said he and Mom had been praying on something, thinking long and hard about Sabrina's future. He wanted to give her a foundation, something real, something to show how proud they were of her success. I felt the first prickle of unease. I did not move. I did not breathe. David lifted his glass and said their Christmas blessing for Sabrina was simple. They were giving her my condo. At first, I honestly thought I heard wrong. The words hit my ears like muffled sounds underwater. I saw people clapping. I saw a few women press their hands to their chests, like this was the sweetest, most generous family gesture they had ever witnessed. Someone near me whispered that he was such a good father. Another said Sabrina deserved it. She had always been the bright one. The condo. My condo. Not some rental property Dad owned on the side. Not some charity gift from his portfolio. My grandmother's condo. The small, crooked, sun-filled place she had lived in for nearly 3 decades. The place she left to me in her will because I was the one who fed her, bathed her, and stayed with her through 4 long, heartbreaking years of decline. I had signed the hospice papers. I had held her hand the night she passed. That place was mine. My name on the deed. My sweat on the walls. My weekends spent sanding floors, repainting cabinets, replacing every battered fixture until it felt like the closest thing to a home I had ever had. Sabrina raised her hand to her mouth, pretending to be shocked. Her eyes glistened. She leaned into Dad's side like she needed support. But then she glanced at me, and in that split second, her expression held no surprise, only victory. I felt something climb up my throat. My hands trembled. My heartbeat thudded with a hollow echo in my ears. And then I heard my own voice. It cut across the applause, clean and sharp. I said the condo was mine. I said my grandmother left it to me, and I was not giving it away. Silence fell like a heavy blanket. Thick. Electric. The kind of silence that feels alive. Dad turned toward me slowly. For a moment, he wore the face the world knew. Warm and controlled. Then the edges hardened. The mask ripped. He stepped toward me, setting his champagne down with a tiny clink that sounded far too loud. He grabbed my elbow, fingers digging through my sleeve, pulling me close to the center of the patio. The smell of whiskey hit first, then the sourness beneath it. His voice was low, meant for me alone. He hissed that I was ruining the night, that I had no gratitude, that Sabrina was the successful daughter, the one worth investing in. Then he straightened, puffed out his chest, and raised his voice so everyone could hear. He said I was dramatic, ungrateful, difficult. He said someone like me did not need a place like that Sabrina deserved it more. The word failure slid out of his mouth like something he had been saving. Failure. The failed daughter. I felt a dozen eyes cut through me. Mom stood frozen near the sliding door, one hand still holding a platter. My uncle stared at his shoes. No one said my name. I repeated it, quieter this time. That it was my home, and I was not giving it away. Something inside him snapped. The flush on his neck deepened. His hand tightened on my arm until pain shot up toward my shoulder. He told me I would not embarrass him in his own house. Then he shoved me. There is no pretty way to describe it. One moment I was standing on stone pavement. The next, my body flew backward faster than my mind could process. My shoulder slammed into the brick column. The back of my skull followed with a crack that felt like it split the air itself. A bright burst of white swallowed my vision. My ears rang like a fire alarm. My knees buckled. I pressed my hand against the rough brick, trying to keep from sliding all the way down to the cold ground. Everything was silent. Too silent. No music. No voices. No one stepped forward. And then I saw it. Above us, perched on the corner of the roof, the security camera stared down with its red recording light glowing steady and bright. Watching everything, unblinking, hope flickered through the haze of pain. If that camera saw what he did, then maybe, for once, it was not his word over mine. Dad was still breathing hard, his chest heaving. He jabbed a finger toward the side gate, told me to get out. I looked around. Mom was already moving toward a guest, smoothing over the scene with a tight smile. My uncle pretended to look for something near the cooler. Selena, frozen. Champagne still in hand, feet glued to the ground. No one came to help. The cold hit like a slap when I stepped off the patio onto the snowy grass. My breath came out in sharp bursts as I walked toward my car. My boots cracked through the thin layer of ice. Every heartbeat thudded behind my eyes like someone flicking a switch. His voice rang in my head. Failure. embarrassment, all the words he used to shape me into something small. But that red light saw everything. I reached my car, slid inside, shut the door, and rested my forehead on the steering wheel. The engine clicked when I turned the key, but before I pulled away, I looked back once. The patio glowed warm behind the glass. The people inside laughed again, like nothing had happened. But something had. And this time, there was proof. The cold hit me like a wall when I stepped off the patio, but I did not make it far. My boots sank into the crusted snow and my knees nearly buckled. The world tilted, brick columns and white lights blurring together at the edges. For a second, I thought I might throw up or pass out or both. I tried to keep walking, but the pounding in my head grew sharper, hotter, and a tight pulse beneath my skull. The back of my neck throbbed where it had hit the brick. My breath came out in short, shaky clouds. I wrapped my arms around myself and kept moving toward the side of the house, away from the crowd, away from every pair of eyes that had watched what he did and did nothing. I leaned one hand on the wooden siding to steady myself. The boards were cold under my palm. My vision flickered between light and dark, and I blinked hard until the outline of the mudroom door came into focus. It was cracked open, probably left that way by one of the kids earlier. Warm air slipped out in a thin ribbon. I slipped inside. The mudroom was dim and quiet, smelling faintly of pine cleaner and damp wool. Books lined the wall. Coats hung from hooks, shadowy in the low light. The party noise was muffled now, just a rumble behind the walls. My body sagged in relief at the small pocket of silence. I shut the door softly behind me and moved down the short hall toward the downstairs bathroom. My feet knew the path even when my mind felt fogged. I pushed the bathroom door open, stepped inside, and turned the lock. The moment the lock clicked, something inside me loosened. I braced both hands on the edge of the sink and took a long, shaky breath. My reflection in the mirror wavered. My cheek was red. My eyes are too bright. A small line of blood trailed from behind my ear down my neck, thin and dark. Seeing it made my stomach twist. And then, out of nowhere, a memory snapped into place with perfect clarity. 1 week earlier, Dad, sitting on the living room couch with a tablet in his hands, a mug of black coffee steaming beside him, the late afternoon light slanting through the blinds, turning the whole room pale blue. He had called me in, claiming he kept hearing noises near the back fence at night, said the motion alerts were glitching. He handed me the tablet and asked me to check the security cameras. He even told me the password out loud, a simple mix of words and numbers he should never have said where anyone else could hear. I logged into the Nest account, showed him how the cloud recordings worked, how to scroll through timelines and switch cameras. He nodded along, acting like he understood, though I knew he would forget most of it within an hour. At the time, it meant nothing. Just another quiet task he expected me to handle. But tonight, standing in this bathroom with blood drying on my skin and pain throbbing, through the back of my head, the memory slammed into me. The password, the camera, the red recording light glowing above the patio, and the app is still saved on my phone. My heart thudded in my throat. I pulled my phone out with shaking hands. The screen lit the small room with a cold glow. I opened the Nest app. It loaded instantly, dropping me right into the dashboard. He had not changed a thing. A slow, steady breath left my body. For the first time since he shoved me, I felt something shift. I did not feel safe. Not even close, but I felt the faint, steady rise of control, a tiny foothold, a truth he could not twist unless I let him. I stared at my reflection again. My eyes were still bright, but the panic in them had changed shape. Underneath it was something sharper, something that felt like resolve. My voice came out so quiet it barely carried above the hum of the vent. If I do not save myself, no one else will. I rinsed my hands quickly under the cold faucet, wiped them on a towel, and closed my fingers around the phone again. My pulse pounded at the thought of what I was about to do, but I knew I had no choice. If Dad realized the camera caught everything, he would get to the footage first. He would delete it, deny it, erase it like every other thing that did not fit the story he wanted. Unless I moved now. I unlocked the bathroom door. The hallway on the other side waited in silence. For a second, I just stood there with my hand still on the bathroom doorknob, listening. The sounds from the party floated through the house in muffled layers. Laughter from the living room, the clink of plates from the kitchen, a burst of Christmas music rising and then fading again. It was like the walls were trying to pretend nothing had happened on that patio. My head throbbed in a heavy, pulsing way that made the edges of my vision fuzz. I could feel the weight of my phone in my pocket, solid and small against my hip. Inside, it was the clip I had just pulled from the cloud, the few seconds that proved he had actually done it. I stepped out into the hallway. The light out there was softer than the harsh bathroom fixture, coming mainly from the string of garland Mom had taped around the mirror at the end of the hall. Little white bulbs blinked on and off, reflecting in the glass. My eyes had just started to adjust when I saw her. She was standing halfway down the hallway, between me and the kitchen, as if she had been waiting. Mom still had the good serving platter in her hands, the one with the silver handles they got as a wedding gift. There were no appetizers on it now. It was empty, like she had put it down somewhere and picked it back up just to have something to hold. Her lipstick was perfect. Not a smudge out of place. Her hair, sprayed and curled, did not have a strand loose. If you only saw her from the shoulders up, you would think she was the picture of a gracious hostess. Her eyes gave her away. They slid over the side of my face, the damp spot in my hair, the stiffness in my shoulders. And then they hardened. For a tiny moment, some foolish part of me still hoped. I waited for her mouth to shape my name with concern, for her to set down the platter and reach for me, to ask if I was hurt. That hope flickered and went out. She did not ask if I was all right. She did not ask what he had done. She did not even ask why there was that smear of red by my ear. Instead, she spoke in that low, controlled voice she used any time she thought someone might overhear from another room. She told me not to make this into a bigger deal than it needed to be. She said Sabrina had earned her moment, that Sabrina deserved respect tonight, not drama. She told me to stop, to think about the family, to consider how this would look. The way she said that word, respect, made my fingers curl into my palms. I wanted to laugh, and I wanted to cry, and my body could not decide which one to choose. So I did neither. I just stood there, staring at her, feeling the ache in the back of my skull, and the deep echo of the shove lingering in my bones. I thought about how many times I had watched her smooth over Dad's sharp edges. The way she would chuckle when he made cutting jokes at my expense in front of other people. The way she would change the subject when I tried to speak up. Her favorite line was always that he did not mean anything by it, that I was too sensitive, that I needed to let things go. Standing there in that narrow hallway with the garland lights blinking behind her, I realized something quiet and awful. She was never going to be on my side. Not against him, not against the story she had spent decades building about our perfect family. I felt something inside me go still. Not broken, exactly. More like a door that had been open for a very long time, slowly swinging shut. I told her softly that I was leaving. I said I was done for the night. Her mouth tightened. For a second, she looked like she might block the hall, like she might reach for my arm the way Dad had. Instead, she shifted just enough for me to pass. As I brushed by, I caught the scent of her expensive perfume under the smell of roasting meat and cinnamon candles. There was not a trace of worry in it. I walked past the kitchen doorway. Through the gap, I could see a cluster of people around the island, plates in hand, talking about some game that had been on earlier. No one looked toward the hall. No one noticed me there. In the living room, somewhere I could not see, I heard Dad's voice rise in a practiced toast again, this time softer, aimed only at the inner circle of guests who had stayed close. He sounded steady, commanding, like the man on the billboards with his company name printed in bold underneath. A hot wave of anger surged through the fog in my head, so strong my knees almost buckled. Out there, he was already rewriting the night, smoothing his image, reassuring everyone that everything was fine, that his family was fine, that he was still the man in control. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself and pushed through the side door toward the mudroom. The air there was cooler, quieter. A row of coats hung heavy on their hooks, boots lined up neatly on the mat. The small lamp on the shelf cast a weak yellow circle. This was the space where we had always dropped our mess before stepping into the main house, the place where real life was supposed to be left behind, so the picture in the minutes. Living room, would stay clean. I slipped my own coat off the hook and shrugged into it slowly, careful not to bump the back of my head against the wall. Every movement sent a dull thud of pain radiating from the point where I had hit. My fingers brushed my phone again as I dug for my car keys. I pulled it out and checked the screen, just to reassure myself the clip was really there. The small thumbnail image sat in my gallery, tiny and still, but I knew what it contained. Him. Me. The shove. The sound that would haunt my sleep for a very long time. My heart beat a little slower when I saw it, like my body recognized that in this one small way, I was not entirely defenseless. The side door out to the driveway stuck for a second when I pulled on it, the way it always did in the winter, when the frame swelled from the cold. I gave it a harder tug and it opened with a little groan. I stepped out into the night. The sky was the deep, heavy black you only see on clear, cold nights in there. Mountains, pinpricked with stars. The air sliced into my lungs again, sharp and dry. Light from the kitchen window spilled across part of the snow, turning it pale gold, but the rest of the yard was shadowed. I could hear faint music through the walls, a Christmas song my grandmother used to hum under her breath while stirring. Gravy. The memory hurt. I walked carefully toward my car, one arm wrapped across my middle, the other pressed against the side of my head as if I could somehow hold myself together from the outside. The snow crunched quietly under my boots. Each step felt both too slow and too fast. At the edge of the driveway, I risked one last look back at the house. Through the large picture window in the living room, I could see Dad's silhouette, tall and straight, with his arm lifted in another gracious gesture. People leaned in toward him, faces turned up, giving him their full attention. Behind them, the glow of the tree lit up the ornaments my grandmother had once hung on her own branches. The sight made my chest ache. I turned away before he could glance out and see me there. By the time I reached the car and opened the door, my vision was starting to swim again. I eased myself into the driver's seat and pulled the door shut, cutting off the sounds of the party. The sudden quiet inside the car rang in my ears. I sat there for a moment with my eyes closed, one hand wrapped tight around the phone in my lap, the other resting on the steering wheel. I thought of the camera light, that small, steady red eye catching everything. I thought of the way his fingers had dug into my arm, the way my mother's face had gone cold instead of worried, the way no one had said my name. Then I thought of my condo, the one place in this world that really was mine, the one space where their voices did not dictate every inch. The floors I had refinished myself, the window where the afternoon light always pooled across the table where my grandmother once sat and told me I was stronger than I believed. My head pounded, but my mind felt clearer than it had in a long time. I started the engine, backed down the driveway, and pointed the car toward the city. I did not know yet how bad the concussion was. I did not know that my friend Ella would be the one to answer her door in slippers and an old college sweatshirt when I showed up shaking on her porch. All I knew at that moment was that I was leaving this house carrying the one thing my dad could not yet control. I had the proof pressed warm against my palm. The highway into Denver was nearly empty, just a few taillights gliding ahead of me, and the occasional set of headlights passing the other way. The world outside the windshield was all dark trees and patches of snow, reflecting the moonlight. Inside the car, the heater wheezed, push out air that never seemed quite warm enough. By the time I reached the old neighborhood near the university, my eyes were burning and my head felt too heavy for my neck. I turned onto the narrow street where Ella lived, the one lined with little bungalows from the 1950s. Her house was halfway down, pale blue with a sagging porch and a wind chime that always sounded just a bit off-key. Her front window was lit. That felt like a small mercy. I pulled into the curb and turned off the engine. For a minute, I just sat there, listening to the ticking of the cooling motor, fighting the urge to put my head down and sleep right where I was. The world outside swam a little when I finally forced the door open. The cold slapped me awake. I wrapped my coat tighter and made my way up the short walk, using the porch railing to help keep my balance. The Christmas wreath on her door was a little crooked, a red bow sagging to one side. I lifted my hand to knock and saw that it was shaking. I managed 2 weak taps before the door swung inward. Ella stood there in flannel pajama pants with little coffee cups printed all over them, and an oversized sweatshirt from our college. her brown hair piled in a messy knot on top of her head. She had a mug in her hand and sleepy confusion on her face, probably expecting a neighbor or a package. Then she saw me. The mug hit the little table by the door with a clatter as she set it down. Her eyes went wide, taking in my pale face, the smear of dried blood at my hairline, the way I was bracing myself on the doorframe. She reached for my arm without a word and guided me inside. The warmth in her living room hit me like a soft wall. A small artificial tree glowed in the corner, covered in mismatched ornaments and a crooked angel that had seen better days. The couch was piled with blankets and a half-finished knitting project. It smelled like coffee, laundry soap, and the faint, clean scent of hospital hand lotion that always seemed to cling to her. Ella sat me down on the couch and knelt in front of me. She spoke softly, her voice steady in the way I had heard her use on frightened patients. She told me to stay still, that she was going to take a look. Her hands were gentle but firm as she turned my head toward the lamp. I watched her eyes as she examined the back of my scalp, felt her fingers parting my hair. Her mouth pressed into a tight line. She told me there was a small cut, not huge but deep enough to bleed more than it should, and a bruise already forming. She asked if I felt nauseous, if I had blacked out, if the lights seemed too bright. I told her my head hurt so much it felt like it was pulsing. I told her about the ringing in my ears. I told her I did not think I had lost consciousness, but it was all a little blurry around the edges. She sat back on her heels and blew out a breath, then said as calmly as she could that I should go to the emergency room. She said head injuries were nothing to play with, that even a mild concussion could turn serious, that she had seen too many people wait too long because they did not want to make a fuss. The idea of sitting under fluorescent lights while strangers poked at my head and asked what had happened made my stomach twist, but I could see the fear in her eyes. We compromised. She would call the nurse advice line she had through the hospital, describe my symptoms, and see if they thought it could wait until morning. While she stepped into the kitchen to make the call, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. The little rectangle felt heavier than it should. I opened the gallery and stared at the thumbnail of the video, my thumb hovering over it without pressing play. I could not bring myself to watch it. Instead, I clicked share and sent it to Ella with a short message asking her to hold on to it for me. I told her I just needed it somewhere safe that was not in my dad's reach. She came back with a glass of water and a couple of over-the-counter pain pills. Said the nurse thought it sounded like a concussion, but that as long as I stayed awake for a while, had someone check on me, and came in if anything got worse, I could stay put for the night. She handed me the pills and the water. Then her phone buzzed. Her eyes dropped to the screen. The color drained from her face as she watched. I knew she had opened the video. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of her old heater and the quiet click of the knitting needles rolling slowly off the couch cushion. I watched her throat work as she swallowed hard, her jaw tightening. Her free hand reached blindly for the coffee table and gripped the edge. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were bright with the kind of anger I had never seen from her. She shook her head once, like she could not quite believe what she had just seen. She said my dad had really done that. She said he had put his hands on me and thrown me into a wall like I was nothing. Her voice broke on the word nothing. She sat down next to me so fast the cushions dipped. She told me this was not a family misunderstanding. She said this was assault. She said I had to report it, that I had to call the police, that I had to go on record before he had a chance to twist the story into something else. The idea of it made my whole body tense. In my mind, I could already hear my mom's voice, telling everyone I was exaggerating, that I had always been emotional, that I was trying to punish my dad for not giving me what I wanted. I could see Sabrina online talking about forgiveness and second chances, making it sound like I was the one destroying the family for attention. I told Ella I was scared, not of him hitting me again, though that fear sat in my chest too, but of the way my family could turn a whole town against me. Dad had money, connections, a whole polished image. I had a small condo and a job that barely paid my student loans. She listened, really listened. Then she put a hand on my arm and said gently that none of that mattered, as much as my safety and my dignity, that what he had done was wrong, that there was no justification, no matter how he dressed it up. She said the video was a kind of miracle, that most people did not get that kind of clear proof. I felt tears prick behind my eyes, hot and humiliating. I hated crying in front of anyone, even her. I said I just needed to breathe, that I could not think straight yet, that I needed to sleep and let my head stop pounding before I made any decisions. She did not push. She just nodded slowly and pulled an extra blanket over my legs. She dimmed the lamp and told me she would stay up for a while to keep an eye on me, to make sure I did not get worse. She said she would wake me if she needed to. I must have drifted off because the next thing I remember is the sound of soft voices from the kitchen and the faint glow of her laptop on the coffee table. My skin felt hot and my body heavy, but there was a chill at the back of my neck. The kind that comes from knowing something has shifted, even if you cannot name it yet. Later, Ella told me what had gone through her mind while I slept. She sat there on the floor, with her back against the couch, watching me breathe. The video open on her laptop. She kept thinking about all the patients she had seen over the years who came in too late, after one too many incidents, after one too many times of being told to keep it in the family. She kept replaying the look on my face as I stood in her doorway, the way my shoulders had slumped, like I had already accepted that this was just how it would always be. She told me she could not stand it. So she made a choice. She opened a fresh browser tab and went to YouTube. She created a new channel with a generic name so it could not be traced back to me, set the settings to keep comments moderated, and uploaded the clip. She did not use our names. In the description, she only wrote that it was footage of a holiday party in Colorado, where a dad had attacked his adult daughter in front of guests. Then she released the video to the public. After that, she logged into the local community group on social media, the one where people usually complained about potholes and recommended plumbers. She dropped the link there with a short note saying that if anyone ever wondered what family violence looked like in real life, this was it. She asked people to share so others could see that this kind of thing did not only happen in faraway places. She told herself she was doing it to warn people, to make sure my dad could not bury what he had done under charm and good suits. She told herself she would take it down if I really wanted her to, once I felt strong enough to decide. She did not expect what happened next. Overnight, while I lay sweating lightly under her extra blankets, the internet did what it sometimes does. One person shared it, then 10, then 100. Someone posted it on a larger page. People in other states started speculating about who the man and the woman the clip were. Why no one around them had stepped in. What had happened after the camera stopped. By the time the view count had jumped past 700,000. She checked it again 2 hours later. It had crossed 2 million. When I finally woke up, my head felt thick but a little clearer. The pain had dulled to a heavy ache. My throat was dry. I rolled onto my side, blinking at the stripes of pale gray coming in through the blinds. My phone, which I must have dropped on the floor sometime during the night, was buzzing and pinging so much it had shifted against the hardwood, vibrating toward the rug. Notification after notification flashed across the screen, a rapid-fire blur of numbers and names I did not recognize. Before I could reach for it, Ella hurried in from the kitchen, her own phone clasped in her hand, her face a mix of worry and grim determination. She sat down on the edge of the couch and told me that I needed to take a deep breath. Then she said my name, slowly, like she knew it was about to land differently than it ever had before. She said that people were looking for me. The words barely settled in my mind when Ella handed me my phone. The screen lit up with a flood of missed calls, message requests, and news alerts, each one stacking on top of the next so quickly the icons blurred. My throat tightened. I sat up slowly, the room tilting for a moment, then steadied myself with a hand on the arm of the couch. Ella was watching me closely, ready to catch me if I swayed. I swiped the first notification. A local news station had posted an article. The headline hit me square in the chest. A local businessman assaults daughter on Christmas Eve. I stared at it while my pulse roared in my ears. It was surreal seeing words like that attached to my life, my family, the house where I had eaten Thanksgiving dinner only 1 month earlier. I scrolled down just enough to see a still image from the video, blurred slightly to protect my identity, but there was no mistaking my dad's silhouette or the brick column behind me. Ella reached over and gently pulled the phone from my fingers before I could. She told me to breathe. I tried. The air felt thin, but the world was moving faster than my lungs. Her laptop was still open from the night before, and from the couch I could see the notifications running along the side of her screen. Someone had posted the video in a national forum. Someone else had clipped it and slowed down the frame where my body hit the wall. Comment after comment rolled in. People arguing, analyzing, connecting dots. I felt like I was floating outside my own life. Ella left me for a moment to check on the tea she had brewing, and I used the chance to stand up. My legs ached, like I had run a long distance and forgotten the journey. I walked to her front window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek out. Denver in the early morning felt completely normal. A kid pulled a sled down the sidewalk. No one looked toward Ella's house. No one pointed at me. No one whispered my name. But inside that living room, inside that video, spreading like wildfire, my world was already being peeled open. When she told me something that made my stomach drop. My dad's name was already trending in our city. People online had figured out who he was within a few hours. They had matched the house in the video to real estate listings. They had recognized the last name from his company website. They had posted screen captures of his smiling face from charity events, cutting ribbons in front of new developments, and shaking hands with city officials. Then they went digging. Ella showed me another tab. A long thread on a neighborhood forum had dozens of comments from people who said they had worked for or with my dad at some point. Former employees, neighbors, contractors, people with stories of him yelling, belittling, cutting corners. One person claimed he had fired an older worker just weeks before retirement to avoid planning benefits. Another talked about a construction project that had been covered up after. Serious safety violations. The image of the perfect businessman was cracking. The cracks were spreading fast. I felt a strange mix inside me. Fear, relief, shame. Something like vindication. Something like grief. It all tangled together in a knot at the center of my chest. I kept thinking about how many times I had convinced myself that no one would believe me if I ever spoke up. Now strangers were connecting dots I had never dared to speak aloud. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Sabrina. Her message popped up in one long bubble. I hope you're happy. Everything is ruined because of you. Dad is a wreck. Mom is crying. You need to fix this. Take the video down now. I read it twice, then handed the phone to Ella, who made a sharp, disbelieving sound under her breath. She asked me if Sabrina had seen the video. I told her she probably had by now. I told her Sabrina had always been protected from the worst parts of our dad's temper. Then the phone buzzed again. Another message from Sabrina. You always have to make things about you. You can never let anyone else shine. Why did you have to do this? I closed my eyes. For a second, it felt like I was 12 years old again, standing in the hallway outside the kitchen, listening to my mom tell me to stop being jealous, to stop making drama, to stop upsetting Sabrina. The echo. Ella reached for my hand and squeezed, her grip warm and steady. Before I could answer Sabrina, a new call came in. Mom's name filled the screen. I should have let it ring. I was not ready, but the years of trained obedience kicked in before my mind could catch up. I answered. Her voice poured through the speaker in a trembling rush. She was crying, the thin, frantic kind of crying that always came when something threatened the image she curated so carefully. She asked me what I had done, asked why I would humiliate the family like this, asked how I could allow strangers to see something so private. I tried to speak, but she cut me off. She kept saying, family first. Family always comes first, Marley. Why could you not keep this in the family? Why would you turn on your own dad? She said no one needed to know. She said I was blowing things out of proportion. She said Dad had been under stress. She said Sabrina was heartbroken. She said I needed to fix what I had started. Hearing only loosened. I whispered that he had thrown me into a wall, She went quiet for a moment. Then she said that sometimes people get emotional, that sometimes things happen in the heat of the moment, that I needed to think about what this would do to him. To him, not to me. Her voice kept rising. I could feel Ella stiffen beside me. Finally, I found the strength to end the call. My hand was shaking as I lowered the phone. I barely had time to take a breath before the next call came in. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. assuming it was another reporter or someone trying to get a reaction. But something told me to answer. When I did, a calm voice identified themselves as a detective from the Denver Police Department. They said they had seen the circulating video. They said someone had filed a report overnight. They said they needed to meet with me as soon as possible to take my statement, formally. The words washed over me in a surreal wave. A detective. A real investigation. Real consequences. For a moment, all I could hear was the rush of my own heartbeat. I told them I could meet later that day if needed. They said they would call me back with a time and a location. I hung up and stared at the phone in my lap. Everything was happening so fast I could not catch my breath. Ella brushed hair gently away from my face, her expression softening. She asked how I felt. I told her I felt like I was being dragged by a current too strong to fight. She nodded. She said, "Sometimes currents take you where you need to go. Even when you do not, realize you are ready." I leaned back against the couch, feeling the exhaustion settle deep into my bones. The bruise behind my ear pulsed with every heartbeat, but it felt almost secondary now, like the pain was moving to places inside me that were not physical. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to gather the pieces of myself. When I opened them, Ella was staring at her phone, her face tightening. She turned the screen toward me. A live stream. My dad's name at the top. The viewer counts climbing rapidly. He was sitting in his office, the expensive wood paneling behind him, his expression solemn and practiced. He said he loved his daughters. He said he would never hurt them. He said that the clip online had been taken out of context, that I had slipped, that he had reached to steady me, that I had fallen back on the brick column by accident. He said I had thrown myself into the wall. He said he was devastated that I was struggling emotionally, and he hoped I would get the help I needed. He said forgiveness was important during the holidays. He even looked into the camera with moist eyes. I watched the comments scroll beneath his face. People curse. People calling him out. People accusing him of lying. People posting screenshots of the video over his claims. The fury was instantaneous. Ella muted the sound and set the phone aside. Her jaw clenched. The room felt like it had tilted a few degrees off-center. I did not say anything at first. My throat felt tight, like if I spoke, the whole fragile dam inside me might break open. Finally, I whispered that he was lying. Ella rested her hand lightly on my shoulder and said she knew. Outside her window, the neighborhood looked exactly the same as it always had. Snow on porches, smoke from chimneys. Life is going on. But inside that small living room, with its crooked Christmas angel and mismatched blankets, my world had split into a before and an after. And the after was only just beginning. The detective called back that same afternoon while I was still in Ella's sweatshirt and borrowed socks, my head wrapped in the faint smell of her laundry detergent. Ella drove me downtown because there was no way I was getting behind the wheel, again with my brain still humming. The Denver Police Building looked like every government building I had ever seen. Gray stone and glass, too bright inside. The air a little too cold. They led us into a small interview room with beige walls and a table that had seen too many nervous hands. The detective was calm and professional. He started a recorder and asked me to walk him through everything, from the moment I arrived at the Christmas party to the moment I walked out, through the side door with blood in my hair. Telling it out loud made parts of it feel more real and other parts feel far away, like it was a story I had heard about someone else. When I finished, he asked if I still had the video. I slid my phone across the table. He watched quietly, jaw tight, then copied the file onto a flash drive and handed the phone back. He said the video, plus the statements from some of the guests who had already come forward, gave them enough to move from a question to a charge. He said that if I was willing to cooperate, the district attorney's office would likely take this very seriously. I felt my stomach flip at the word charge. On the way out, he handed me a card and suggested I talk to a good attorney. Not just about the assault, but about the condo and anything else my dad might try. Ella had already thought of that. By the next morning, she had an appointment set up with a woman named Kristen Hall, mid-40s, highly recommended, the kind of lawyer who had a reputation for being polite in the lobby and a shark in the courtroom. Kristen's office was in a renovated brick building near Union Station. The waiting room had soft gray chairs and a wall of framed degrees. A plant in the corner looked too healthy to be real. When her assistant ushered us back, I half expected some stern figure in a severe suit. Kristen surprised me. She stood to shake my hand, firm and steady, but her eyes were kind. Her dark hair was pulled back, but a few strands had escaped around her face. She wore a navy dress and a sweater instead of a suit jacket, and there was a coffee stain on a stack of folders on her desk, like she actually used her office instead of only posing in it. She sat, folded her hands, and said she had seen the video. Then she said she needed to hear everything, not just about the party, but about the condo, about my relationship with my family, about anything that might matter. So I started at a different beginning. I told her about my grandma Helen, about the little one-bedroom condo in a tired building off Franklin Street that always smelled like old carpet in the hallways, about how, when I was in my mid-20s, Gran started forgetting things and getting confused, how my parents said they were too busy with work, and my sister was always on a trip or with her friends, how everyone agreed someone should check in on Grandma more often. That someone turned out to be me. I remembered the first night I stayed over after she forgot the stove was on. The small kitchen, the ancient laminate counters, the floral curtains she refused to replace. I remembered helping her up the 3 shallow steps from the parking lot, the way her hand felt light but fragile on my arm. I told Kristen how 4 years went by like that. 4 Christmases in that little living room with the thrift store tree. 4 sets of birthdays where I put candles in the store-bought cupcakes because Grandma said making a whole cake for 2 people was silly. 4 winters of driving across town after work in my old car when the roads were slick, just to make sure she had taken her meds and locked her door. I told her how my parents came by maybe twice a year, how Sabrina stopped in when it suited her, usually with a latte in one hand and her phone in the other, snapping pictures of Grandma's old porcelain angels because they were vintage. I remembered being the one holding Grandma's hand in the hospital when her lungs finally gave out, the way her fingers curled around mine with the last bit of strength she had. My parents arrived after the doctor had already turned off the monitor. Sabrina blew in 20 minutes later with mascara already smeared. I did not cry in Kristen's office when I got to that part. I had done my crying in that hospital room. I just kept going. A few weeks after the funeral, the lawyer handling Grandma's estate called me in. He looked surprised when I showed up alone. He told me that my grandmother had left very clear instructions, that the condo was to go to me and only me, that she had written my full name in her own shaky hand on the will. She had written one sentence that stuck in my mind. He read it out loud in his small, dry voice. I leave my home to Marley because she was the one who did not leave me. My parents did not like it. They said it would have made more sense to sell the place and split the money. The place was old. The neighborhood was nothing special. The building needed work, but the will was clear, and in the end, they let it go. Maybe because the condo was not worth much at the time. Maybe because they assumed I would fail at fixing it up and sell it anyway. I told Kristen how I moved in with my boxes of thrift store furniture and cheap cookware. How I learned to live with the rattling in the pipes and the uneven floors. How every extra dollar I could scrape together went into replacing fixtures, repainting walls, and updating the ancient bathroom. I did the work slowly and quietly, one paycheck at a time. Then I told her what changed. 3 years ago, the city announced a new light rail line. The map on the news showed a bright-colored stripe running right by my block. Overnight, everything near the planned station started getting attention. Developers sniffed around. Buildings that had been ignored for decades suddenly looked like investments. Property values in my area jumped. Not a little, double. Now the same condo my parents had once shrugged off as a burden was worth real money. Agents started leaving cards in the lobby. Handwritten notes appeared under my door, asking if I wanted to sell. I tossed them all in the recycling bin. Around the same time, Selena's life started looking shinier on the outside and shakier underneath. First came the luxury apartment she could not really afford. Then the new car. Then the trips for fun instead of work. Credit cards were easy to swipe. Bills were easier to ignore. When she called me crying about debt collectors, I tried to help her budget. She did not want a budget. She wanted a bailout. And then, this Christmas, out of nowhere, Dad stood up in front of our entire family and his clients and gave her exactly that. My condo, my inheritance. The only real tangible thank you I had ever gotten for those 4 years with Grandma. By the time I finished talking, my throat felt raw. Kristen had not interrupted once. She had taken notes, occasionally underlining something, occasionally looking up with a question in her eyes that she would save for later. When I finally stopped, the room felt very quiet. She leaned back in her chair and took a long breath, letting it out slowly. Then she said, in a voice that was calm but had steel underneath, that what my dad had attempted on that patio was not just violence. It was an attempted theft of property tied to a clear will. She said the video of the assault was powerful on its own. She said the will from my grandmother, plus the fact that I had been the one caring for her, plus my payment records for the renovations, made the condo situation clear-cut. Ironclad, she called it. She told me that if my father or anyone acting for him tried to move against it, the title she could file for an emergency injunction so fast it would make their heads spin. She recommended we do something preemptive as well, to put a legal fence around the condo and attach it to the broader assault case as evidence of motive. The words legal fence made something in my chest loosen just a little. I imagined an invisible barrier going up around my little building, around the floors I had sanded myself, around the window where Grandma used to sit with her tea. For the first time since the party, I felt a sliver of genuine safety. Kristen also said something else. The public nature of what had happened, the fact that it had all been recorded and shared, gave us leverage that most victims of family violence never had. She said the court system often moved slowly, but that judges and prosecutors were human. They lived in the same world, saw the same news. They would know eyes were on this case. She asked if I was ready for a long fight. I thought about my dad's live stream, his practiced, sad eyes. I thought about my mom's voice on the phone, begging me to protect him. I thought about Sabrina's texts blaming me for the collapse of the party and her perfect future. Then I thought about Grandma Helen sitting at her tiny kitchen table, pressing her cool hand over mine and telling me, in her soft, steady way, that doing the right thing was rarely comfortable. I told Kristen I did not feel ready. Not really, but I also told her I was not willing to go back. She nodded like that was the only answer that mattered. As Ella and I were putting on our coats in the hallway outside Kristen's office, my phone buzzed with a new text. This time, it was from the detective. He let me know that they had called my dad in for a second round of questioning. This time, he wrote, "Your dad has to answer, knowing we have the video, your statement, and the beginnings of a paper trail about the condo." I stared at that message until the words blurred, then slipped the phone back into my pocket. Somewhere across town, in an office he had always controlled, my dad was sitting in a very different chair, facing questions he could not talk his way around so easily. For the first time in my life, he was the one being cornered. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked out into the cold with Ella beside me, the sky over Denver turning the color of steel. She offered to let me stay another night, but something inside me wanted to go home. Not the house I grew up in, not the one where Christmas lights were still probably twinkling across the back patio, like nothing had happened. I wanted to be somewhere that felt like mine. So she drove me to my condo. The building looked the same as always, the faded brick and the uneven steps, the old railing Grandma used to grip with both hands. A thin line of snow had settled on the sidewalk, untouched. I fished for my keys, and when the lock clicked open, something in my chest loosened. The heat had been off for 2 days, so the place was cold until I turned the thermostat up. I stood in the middle of the small living room, breathing in the familiar scent of old wood and the faint trace of lavender from one of Grandma's old drawer sachets. The rocking chair she used to sit in was still by the window. I never had the heart to move it. A framed photo sat on the side table, Grand and me in matching aprons, standing in her tiny kitchen. She had flour on her cheek that day. I had flour everywhere. I ran my thumb over the glass, remembering how she always hummed when she cooked, the sound soft and steady like she was anchoring the whole world in place. For a moment, the quiet wrapped around me like a blanket. Even with the lights off and the rooms chilled, the condo felt safe in a way nothing else had for days. I made some tea and sat on the couch with one of Grandma's quilts over my knees. The bruise behind my ear throbbed, but the warmth helped. Outside, the wind rattled the old windows just enough to sound familiar. I closed my eyes and let myself breathe. I told myself I was safe. I almost believed it. It was sometime after midnight when the knock came. Not a knock, really. A pound, sharp and heavy. The kind that makes your stomach drop before your mind catches up. I froze. Another pound hit the door, harder this time. Then my dad's voice slashed through the quiet, loud enough for the whole building to hear. "Marley, open this door, right now!" My mouth went dry. I wrapped the quilt tighter and took one step back. I could smell the alcohol through the wood, that sour, sharp smell that always came with his worst nights. He pounded again. "You talked to a lawyer. You think you can drag this family through the mud. You think you can steal from us. Open this door. Do not make me come in there." My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped my phone. I backed away from the door, heart hammering so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I dialed 911 with my thumb, fighting to keep my voice steady when the operator answered. "My dad is outside my door. He is drunk. He is yelling. I was assaulted by him yesterday, and I have a case open. I need help right now." The operator told me to stay on the line and move to a safe place inside the home. I retreated into the bedroom and shut the door, pressing my back against it. The voice in my ear told me officers were on their way. But Dad kept going. "You ruined everything. You embarrassed me. You think you can take that condo and the whole city will cheer for you? Are you proud of yourself? Are you happy now? Come out here and talk to me." His voice cracked with anger, a sound I had heard many times, but never like this. Never outside my door in the middle of the night. I closed my eyes and clenched the phone tighter. Then I heard another voice. Sabrina. "Oh my God, Dad, stop it." She hissed the words like she was trying to keep them quiet, but then louder, aimed straight at my door. "Marley, you need to take that video down. You are ruining us. You are ruining everything. Just come out and fix this." Fix this. Of course, even now, even after everything, they still believed I was the one who owed them something. I drew a shaky breath as Dad slammed the door again. The wood cracked near the hinge. My pulse jumped. My legs started to tremble. Then, somewhere in the distance below, faint sirens rose through the cold air. David's voice faltered. I heard footsteps on the stairs, a sharp command, a man's voice telling my dad to step back from the door, then pounding on the railing as he shuffled backward, muttering curses. Sabrina's voice pleading with him in panicked bursts. Boots on the landing. A radio crackling. I stepped out of the bedroom slowly, still holding the phone, still listening to the dispatcher telling me officers had arrived. I opened my front door a few inches and saw 2 cops separating Dad from them. Entrance. He smelled like whiskey even from several feet away. His face was red, his eyes glazed, but the anger was still there, simmering. One of the officers kept a firm hand on his arm while another took notes. Dad tried to lunge forward twice, each time pulled back. Sabrina stood on the landing with her arms wrapped around herself, mascara streaking down her cheek. The second she saw me, she pointed. "Look at what you are doing to him!" She sounded hysterical. "Look at what you made him do. Why could you not keep this in the family? Why do you want to destroy us?" Dad tried to shout something else, but the officer cut him off sharply. "Sir, this is an active investigation. You need to stay where you are." They asked me if I wanted to press charges for tonight's incident. I nodded before my brain caught up. My throat felt tight, but the word yes left my mouth anyway. The officer wrote everything down, including the details of the threats, the pounding on the door, the way Dad had tried to force himself inside. He looked at me gently and said that what happened tonight qualified as attempted intimidation. He told me the city took that seriously, especially in cases connected to ongoing assault investigations. Then he suggested something I had not expected. "You should consider getting a restraining order." The words hung in the freezing air of the stairwell. Sabrina gasped like he had slapped her. David shouted something about lies and betrayal, but the officer shut him down again. I stood there, gripping the edge of my doorframe, the quilt still wrapped around my shoulders like armor, watching the man who raised me being led down the stairs by 2 officers, while my sister cried behind them. Part of me felt hollow. Part of me felt like my lungs had opened wide for the first time in years. And part of me, the part that remembered Grandma Helen's trembling hand in mine, felt like I was finally stepping into a life that belonged to me. The officer paused at the top of the stairs before leaving and repeated it one more time. Think about the restraining order, miss. You have more than enough grounds. After they left and the stairwell fell silent again, I closed my door and pressed my forehead against the cool wood. For the first time since Christmas Eve, the condo did not just feel like a place. It felt like a line being drawn, a line he could not cross again. For the first time since Christmas Eve, the condo felt like a line he could not cross again. The next morning, that line was on the news. I woke up on the couch with the quilt half on the floor and my neck stiff, the faint ache in my head pulsing with my heartbeat. The television remote was still in my hand from the night before. When I clicked the screen on, I expected one of those cheery morning shows with recipes and holiday decorations. Instead, I saw my dad's face. It was a still image, taken from one of his charity galas. Perfect tux, perfect smile. Underneath, bold letters ran across the bottom of the local station. A well-known developer returns to confront an assault victim at home. My stomach dropped. The anchor was talking in that careful, measured voice they use when they know. People are divided. They recapped Christmas Eve at the Hanover house, the viral video, the growing outrage. Then they said that late last night, police had been called to a small condo near Franklin Street, where the same businessman had allegedly tried to confront his daughter again. They showed the outside of my building, the stairwell, the street. Thankfully, not my door. The reporter stood on the sidewalk with a microphone, scarf tucked under her chin, talking about escalation, about pattern, about the courage it took for victims to call for help. They mentioned that no arrests had been made yet, but that a second report had been filed, and the district attorney was reviewing it. I turned the volume down until the sound was a faint murmur, then just sat there, staring. It was one thing to know people had seen the video. It was another to see my life turned into back-to-back news segments, complete with graphics and timelines. My dad's name was not just on the mouths of neighbors anymore. It was spoken on the evening news, on talk radio, in comment sections I would never see. I did not have to go looking for the fallout. By midday, it started finding me. Ella showed up with a bag of groceries, and that look on her face she gets. When she has news she knows I cannot avoid. She set the bag on the counter and opened her phone, scrolling quickly. She told me that one of Richard's biggest partners, a national investment group that had backed several of his projects, had posted a statement on their website. They were suspending all new work with Hanover Development pending an internal review. The statement used phrases like zero tolerance and serious concerns. Another email came in while she was talking. A client of his had forwarded it to the news. A bank had quietly frozen several of the company's lines of credit until they could evaluate reputational risk. Those were the words they used. Reputational risk, written in polite corporate language, but I could hear the meaning underneath. For years, he had made people feel small in private. Now the consequences were landing in very public ways. It did not stop with him. By late afternoon, Sabrina called. This time, I let it go to voicemail. Her voice on the recording was high and brittle, stretched thin. She said her employer had asked her not to come back after the holidays, that they did not want her as the face of their brand, while her last name was trending for assault and intimidation. She said they had not even given her a chance to explain. She said it was beyond unfair. Somewhere in the middle of the message, she managed to say that if I would just take the video down and clear Dad's name, she could probably get her job back. It was always a circle with them. Every road led back to what I could do for them. Ella watched my face as I listened. When the message ended, she did not say, "I told you so." Even though she could have, she just put a mug of coffee in my hands and said quietly that sometimes, then fallout finally reaches people who thought they were safe. Later that day, something unexpected happened. The same video that had turned my life inside out started doing something else. It started connecting me to people I had never met. Ella sat at my kitchen table scrolling through comments and messages, her finger flicking so fast I got dizzy just watching. She said that buried between the noise and the arguments, there were messages from women all over Colorado and beyond. Women who had grown up with fathers who used rage as a weapon. Women who had been shoved in kitchens, grabbed in hallways, screamed in driveways, always with the warning not to tell anyone, not to embarrass the family. They wrote that watching me say one simple word in that video did not make something in them soften or crack or stand taller. They thanked me for not letting him rewrite what had happened. They thanked me for pressing charges. Some of them said they had finally talked to their own kids about things they had never named before. I sat there clutching my mug while Ella read bits aloud, my eyes burning in that way they do when tears go out, but you are so tired, you can barely let them. On social media, a phrase started showing up over and over. Stand with Marley. People had turned it into a hashtag, into posters at a small march downtown, into handwritten signs outside the courthouse, in photos I had not even known were taken. My name, which had always felt like something I had to make smaller to fit inside my family, was suddenly on cardboard and in headlines. Not because I was perfect, not because I had done something glamorous, but because I had finally refused to be quiet. In the middle of all that, Kristen called. Her voice was steady as always. She said the judge had reviewed the emergency petition she filed first thing that morning. She said, in plain, simple words, that the court had granted a temporary restraining order. It covered me, my workplace, and the condo. It barred my dad from coming within several hundred feet of any of those places. It barred him from contacting me directly or indirectly outside of legal channels. Any violation could now put him in a cell instead of just in a news clip. I wrote down the case number with my hand shaking, then pinned the paper to the corkboard next to Grandma's old recipe cards. When I hung up, Ella hugged me so hard my ribs creaked. For a long moment, I let myself lean into it, into the feeling that something bigger than me was finally standing between his anger and my front door. The quiet that settled over the condo that evening felt different. Not just the quiet of being alone, but the quiet of having a boundary that was not only emotional, not only moral, but written in ink by a judge who did not know me and did not owe my family anything. I made myself a simple dinner, the same way Grandma did. Soup from a can upgraded with real vegetables, buttered toast, tea. I ate at her little table, the one I had refinished, staring at the chair where she used to sit. I told her out loud in a voice just above a whisper that I was trying, that I was doing what she would have wanted me to do. The night deepened outside. Lights from the train line in the distance flickered past, steady and dependable. My phone buzzed across the table, startling me. It was an email notification. Kristen again. She rarely wrote emails at night, unless something mattered. I opened it and scanned the first lines. My breath caught halfway in my throat. A former employee of Hanover Development had contacted her firm through a secure form on their website. The message said they had watched the video like everyone else, that they had debated saying anything, but that seeing my dad play the victim on television had finally pushed them over the edge. Attached to the email were several files. According to the brief note Kristen had added, those files looked a lot like internal spreadsheets, copied contracts, and scans of correspondence. The former employee claimed they were proof that my dad had been moving money in ways that did not match the official reports. Redirecting funds, overbilling city projects, hiding losses from investors, financial fraud. For years, my dad had told anyone who would listen that he built his company from nothing, on hard work and integrity, that his reputation was spotless, that people who questioned his methods were just jealous or lazy. Now, as I sat at my tiny kitchen table with a mug of cooling tea and my grandmother's quilt folded over the back of a chair, it looked like the same video that had captured him throwing me into a wall had also cracked something open in the people who once worked under him. Kristen's final line in the email was short but heavy. We may be looking at more than just an assault case now. I closed my laptop gently and sat there in the dim light of the little condo that had been dismissed as a burden until it was worth real money. Outside, the city kept moving. Trains hummed, cars passed. Somewhere a siren wailed and faded. Inside, a different kind of siren had begun. Quiet, but relentless. In the shape of numbers on spreadsheets and signatures on contracts. For the first time, it was not just my bruises or my memories against his word. It was the truth he had buried in his own books, rising to the surface. The hearing came faster than I expected. Maybe it was because the case had become so public. Maybe because the district attorney wanted to move quickly before anything else escalated. But within 2 weeks, I found myself walking into the Denver County Courthouse. with Kristen at my side. The winter air cut across my face the second we stepped out of the car. Reporters were gathered near the steps, with cameras and long boom mics. But court marshals kept them behind a barricade. Still, they shouted questions the second I appeared. I kept my eyes down. Kristen kept one hand just behind my shoulder, steady and close, but not touching. Inside, the courtroom was already filled. Every bench was taken. Some people stood in the back along the wall, bundled in coats, eyes trained on the front of the room. I recognized none of them, and yet their presence made my pulse jump. Some held small signs tucked under folded arms. One woman wore a scarf embroidered with the phrase that had followed me, everywhere. "Stand with Marley." Kristen leaned over and whispered that this was normal in high-profile hearings. I nodded, though nothing about this felt normal. The wood smelled like lemon polish. The judge's bench loomed high. The seal on the wall behind it felt like a stern eye watching everything unfold. When they brought my dad in, he walked stiffly. His suit was pressed, his hair combed. He looked like he was about to pitch a real estate deal instead of face charges. He did not look at me. His jaw was tense, the muscles sharp under the skin. Sabrina sat behind him with a tissue crumpled in her hand, shoulders shaking even before anything started. When the judge entered, the room went still. The prosecutor presented first. She laid out the timeline: the Christmas Eve party, the confrontation, the video, the second incident at my condo. She spoke with a calm, measured voice, each word clean and sharp. Then she asked for the video to be played. I braced myself. A clerk wheeled in a monitor and angled it so the whole room could see. Lights dimmed. The footage loaded. There I was on the patio. I looked smaller than I remembered. My hair fell across part of my face. The crowd behind us blurred into shadows. My dad's arm reached out. His fingers grabbed my upper arm. His body leaned forward with that quick, controlled anger I knew too well. Then the shove. My shoulder hitting the brick. My head whipped sideways. A small sound rippled through the crowd. Not gasps, exactly. Something lower. Something like knowing. When the clip ended, the room stayed quiet for several long seconds. Even Sabrina wiped her eyes. My dad stared straight ahead, unmoving. The prosecutor next played the audio captured by the second camera. The microphone had picked up more than I expected. His voice was shouting, the words he had spit at me, the crack in his tone when his temper peaked. The judge's expression did not change, but the courtroom's air shifted. You could feel it. A kind of collective exhale, long and heavy, evidence that could not be spun or reshaped. When it was the defense's turn, my dad's attorney rose with a confident smile and adjusted his expensive cufflinks. He said the video lacked context. He said I had slipped on ice. He said my dad had reached to stabilize me, not push me. He said the audio was distorted by background noise. He even asked the judge if the lighting on the patio might have created an optical illusion. The prosecutor raised one eyebrow, but let him finish. Then my dad took the stand. I had not heard him speak since the night he came pounding on my door. His voice was different now, softer at first. He said he had made mistakes. He said tensions had been high. He said he had been worried about Sabrina's finances and had overreacted, but he insisted he had never intended to hurt me. When the prosecutor began questioning him, the softness evaporated. She walked him through every second of the video, every movement, every word. She played short segments and asked him to explain each one. He stumbled, then contradicted himself, then snapped that I had always been sensitive, that I had always looked for ways to make him seem like the villain. The judge told him to answer only what was asked. At one point, he lifted his chin toward the packed benches and said he loved his children and that he was heartbroken. I had turned on him. Someone in the back snorted loudly. The bailiff called for order. Then came Sabrina. Her attorney asked the court to allow her to speak, saying she had relevant context. The judge agreed. She climbed into the witness chair with shaking hands. Her mascara was smudged in dark half circles under each eye. She avoided looking at me. Her voice trembled as she began. She said I had misinterpreted what happened. She said Dad had only wanted to talk to me. She said I had made everything worse by involving outsiders. She said families should settle things privately. The The prosecutor let her go on for a minute before stepping forward. She asked Sabrina simple questions at first. Did she see the video? Did she hear his words? Did she know about the restraining order? Sabrina answered in fragmented sentences, her face flushing. Then the prosecutor asked why Sabrina had been at my condo the night of the second incident. Sabrina's eyes darted to her father, then to the judge. She said she had come to calm him down. That was all. The next question was gentle but sharp. Were you there to convince your sister to remove the video because your father asked you to? Or because you needed her condo? The silence that followed stretched long and thin. Sabrina's lips parted, but no sound came out for several seconds. Then she blurted out that I had been selfish for years, that I always acted like I was better than everyone else, that I loved being the victim. The courtroom reacted visibly. Heads shook. Someone murmured. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. The prosecutor let the moment hang, then thanked Sabrina and said no further questions. By the time Sabrina walked back to her seat, her face was red and blotchy. She avoided my eyes again. Then came the part none of us expected. The first time the clerk called the name of a witness I did not recognize. A man in his late 50s stepped forward, wearing a worn jacket and a button-down shirt tucked neatly into faded jeans. He looked nervous, but determined. He stated his name and that he had been a project manager at Hanover Development for almost 20 years, until he quit 3 years earlier. The prosecutor asked if he had brought documents. He nodded and handed a stack of printed papers to the clerk, who passed them to the judge. Another set was handed to the defense. The man explained that after he saw the video of my dad shoving me, something shifted inside him, that he could no longer stay quiet. He said he had copies of email chains, invoices, and financial reports that had bothered him at the time, but he had been afraid to come forward. He pointed to highlighted sections on the documents, showing inflated billing, double entries, unapproved transfers between accounts. The defense objected, but the judge overruled, saying the documents went toward establishing motive and credibility. When asked directly if he believed my dad had committed financial fraud, the man swallowed hard and said yes. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. My dad's face went pale for the first time all day. He tried to interrupt the testimony, insisting he had no idea what this man was talking about. The judge banged his gavel and warned him sharply to remain silent unless spoken to. Then the prosecutor asked the witness one final question. Why now? The man looked at me. He said because he watched a young woman get thrown into a wall on camera and listened to that man call it an accident. And he realized that staying silent made him part of the lie. He stepped down. The quiet afterward felt heavy enough to press on my chest. The judge called a short recess. When the session resumed, everything moved quickly. The judge stated clearly that the evidence met the threshold for guilt on both counts: assault, intimidation. My dad closed his eyes briefly, then lifted his chin like he still believed he could outrun this. The judge said sentencing would be scheduled for a later date. The gavel struck. People rose from the benches. Some stood in stunned silence. Others whispered to each other. Sabrina sank into her chair and cried into both hands. I remained seated for a long moment, one hand gripping the edge of the table. The court had spoken. Maybe not. Not an opinion, not a family argument, a ruling. And now, all that was left was to hear what the punishment would be. The court had spoken, and now, all that was left was to hear what the punishment would be. Sentencing came 3 weeks later, on a cold Thursday morning in January. I wore a simple gray sweater and black pants, nothing that drew attention, and sat beside Kristen in the same wooden pew we had occupied before. The courtroom was less crowded this time, but not empty. A handful of people from the community still showed up, some of them familiar faces from the small gatherings outside the courthouse. They nodded at me in quiet recognition. When my dad was let in, he looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just smaller in presence. Like the polished confidence he had carried for so long had cracked somewhere no one could fix. He did not look at me. He kept his gaze on a spot near the corner of the judge's bench, jaw tight, shoulders stiff. The judge reviewed the findings in a steady voice. 2 counts: assault, intimidation. Evidence strong and unequivocal. Impact on the victim is significant. Then she delivered the sentence. 1 year in county custody. Mandatory anger management. Probation following release. A lifelong no-contact order, meaning he was barred from approaching me in any form, in any place, for the rest of his life. No exceptions. The words hung in the quiet room like a bell tone that kept ringing long after it was struck. A lifetime. He blinked once. Twice. His eyes flicked toward me for a fraction of a second before dropping back to the table in front of him. Sabrina let out a small, strangled sound in the corner behind him. She looked thinner than at the trial and wore a coat several sizes too big, as if she had borrowed it last minute. The judge dismissed the room, and I stayed seated until the bailiff motioned for everyone to leave. When I walked out into the bright hallway, Kristen squeezed my arm gently and told me I had done everything right. The world outside the courthouse felt sharper, cleaner somehow. A cold wind hit my face, and I breathed deeper than I had in weeks. Things changed quickly after that. News of my dad's sentence spread around Denver within hours. Developers he once partnered with issued statements distancing themselves from him. His company released a single line acknowledging his resignation, though by then most people knew the business was crumbling under the weight of frozen accounts and the new fraud investigation quietly building in the background. Sabrina left town 2 weeks after sentencing. A distant cousin told Ella she had moved to an apartment near Phoenix with a friend who owed her a favor. The details stopped mattering after a while. I hoped she would someday understand the damage she caused, but I no longer felt responsible for carrying that hope. My mom did not call. Instead, she mailed a 3-page letter written in her delicate cursive. The paper smelled faintly of her favorite perfume. The apology was tangled in excuses, in what-ifs, in sentences that shifted blame without quite saying the words. I read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer I rarely open. I did not answer. Some doors stay closed for a reason. Amid all of that, something else happened. A packet arrived in the mail from the county recorder's office. Inside was a certified document, crisp and official, confirming that the condo on Franklin Street belonged to me alone, that it had been legally willed to me, that no claim, challenge, or dispute from any family member had any standing under Colorado law. I held the paper for a long moment, letting the weight of those words settle in my chest. It was not just property. It was validation. It was closed. It was the final echo of my grandmother's voice saying she trusted me. She believed in me. She saw me. Ella cried when I showed her. To celebrate, she insisted we host a small gathering in the condo. Nothing fancy, just a handful of people who had held me up through the chaos. We baked the same lemon cookies my grandmother used to make. We hung a tiny strand of lights over the window. We placed her old rocking chair in its usual spot and set one of her favorite knitted blankets across the back. People filled the small living room with warm voices and soft laughter. For the first time in a long while, the condo felt like a home instead of a refuge. We toasted with cider and talked about everything except the trial. At one point, I stood near the window and let myself imagine Grandma's hand, resting lightly on my shoulder. After the gathering, life did not magically become easy, meanwhile, and slower than justice. But I found myself craving purpose again, something bigger than surviving. I reached out to a local women's support group that Ella had mentioned. They welcomed me with open arms. The first time I shared my story in that circle, hands reached for mine from both sides. Women who had lived their own versions of my night told me I was stronger then. I knew. I volunteered to help with their hotline, then later with outreach events. I found meaning in showing up for others, the way no one in my family had shown up for me. Slowly, piece by piece, my life grew into something steady again. Some nights, I still sat in the rocking chair, the quilt tucked around my legs, thinking about the strange path that had brought me here. I thought about silence, the heavy kind that crushes, and the powerful kind that protects. I thought about how justice sometimes comes from the places we least expect. And I thought about how telling the truth, out loud, had saved me in ways I did not understand at the time. In the afternoon, I finally hung the restraining order on my corkboard, right beside my grandmother's handwritten recipe for lemon bars. Ella hugged me and whispered that she was proud of me. I whispered back that I was finally learning to be proud of myself. Sometimes, justice does not come from your family. Sometimes it comes from the moment you decide you deserve better. The moment you refuse to hide what happened, the moment you speak the truth, even if your voice shakes. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.